Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I have found in my travels. Today it is Short Story Tuesday, and boy, do I have a doozy for you, something that is indeed unusual. I am referring to a short story that is about a person trying to find their apartment, a child trying to find the apartment in which they live. I am referring to The Crack by Joyce Carol Oates, which was published in 2021. For those who don't know, Joyce Carol Oates is an American author who has been writing since the 1960s, getting stuff published since the 1960s at least. Joyce Carol Oates has written a number of novels, a number of poems, a number of short stories, seemingly publishing them nonstop. It seems that Joyce Carol Oates writes quite a bit. And publishes at that same frequency, and she's written a number of notable stories like Blonde, that movie, or it was turned into a movie later, but it was about a fictionalized version of Marilyn Monroe. And she's written a number of other books and whatnot too, some of which have been turned into movies, others of which she's won awards for. She's been nominated for several Pulitzers, but I don't think she's won any of them. And yeah, she's won a number of awards and been nominated for a number of awards for her work, writing, about a variety of different ideas, some personal, some more grander in scope. And what's funny is a lot of people have noted how frequently she writes. She's kind of similar to James Patterson, who just writes and writes and writes and often doesn't really write himself. He relies on ghostwriters and whatnot. I don't know if that's the same thing for Joyce Carol Oates, but she just keeps writing and writing and writing. And a lot of people have asked, how do you keep up with Joyce Carol Oates' bibliography? If you're going to review a book, it helps to know her other work. But also, if she writes at such a frequency, there's a question of quality there, because if you the time that you wrote two books in the span of a year or two, you could have written one book that was of higher quality or something like that. I don't really want to judge that, but that does sound a little bit true to me. And it's often, quality over quantity. But if Joyce Carol Oates is selling books and people are enjoying them, I think that's probably what matters most. And also she's on Twitter, but she says a lot of weird things, which, is a bit annoying. But I'm not going to, drag that into this. But without further ado, let's talk about The Crack. I will do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Crack focuses on M, a 10-year-old child. We don't know their full name. We're just told that it is M. They are in elementary school, and they are go near the school one day when they their friend told them that they have to step on cracks and for superstitious reasons, so they are doing that. And the M steps in a shallow crack and twists their ankle pretty severely. And so the mother of a friend takes them home, but doesn't really know how to get to the apartments, and they park in the rear entrance, which normally children don't go through the rear entrance. But M says, I'm very well capable of doing it on my own. So she goes into that rear entrance, discovers that the elevator is out of order, and so she decides to go into the freight elevator with a couple of other people. She barely recognizes these people, but she doesn't know most of them. And she talks to a very plump child who begins talking about very negative things like death and whatnot. And M is uncomfortable with all of this discussion, but luckily the plump child leaves, and M is able to take the elevator up to the 11th floor. Unfortunately, when she gets to the 11th floor, she realizes that this is the freight elevator, and so she doesn't really know the path to 11E, which is where her and her parents live. But she wanders through the hallways and eventually hears a raucous coming from 11E, which sounds like a party. However, when M walks through the door, she realizes that what she's hearing are recordings of her playing music. Specifically, people are talking all about her, saying somewhat unkind things, that she wasn't really talented, but she did try to do a great many of things that require talent. And so she had some skill with piano and drawing and whatnot, but her parents noted that she didn't really have that ability. And they seem to be talking to other people who M recognizes as children from school, and a variety of other people as well. And she then begins to hear that they are talking about how she died. And she realizes that this is a wake, and she has apparently died. She fell down the elevator because it was out of order, and now her parents are suing. And it appears that she's no longer there, and she's of course confused by all of this. And as the story comes to a close, she takes some pizza, interestingly, and she makes her way back to the freight elevator because she doesn't want her parents or anyone to recognize her, if they're even capable of doing that, because she might be a ghost. And that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, what a bizarre but very powerful type of story. I admire Joyce Carol Oates' writing here. It really sucks you in, and it really plays with your emotions, because you're really rooting for this child, and it turns out that the child has unfortunately died, or maybe a sick game or sick joke is being played on the child. Who is to say for sure? But one of the themes that Oates is working with this story is childlike confusion. M is encountering an extremely unfamiliar situation, and she is rightfully confused by everything. We see this at the very beginning of the story. One with the her stepping on the crack and twisting her ankle, which she's probably not really done before. But also she has to enter the back entrance of the apartment, something that nobody does. Like no child really does, as the narrator of the story notes. So she has to kind of figure out how to get to the apartment 11E from that back entrance, and it's very confusing and a little bit scary for M, which is understandable. And then she has to take the freight elevator up, which she normally doesn't do because her parents usually take the regular elevator. But that's out of order, and that's created another unfamiliar situation for M. There's an interesting quote that I would like to read to you from this. In her confused state, M was failing to realize that she'd taken the freight elevator and not the usual elevator to the 11th floor, and so she was in an unfamiliar place. Here, the interior lighting seemed dimmer, less certain. The gunmetal gray carpet was gritty underfoot, as if dirt or sand had been tracked inside, and was the building trembling? In windstorms, sometimes you could feel the building actually shudder and sway. And there you get the essence of her confusion. You're noting that she took the freight elevator up rather than the regular elevator, and so there's that difficulty finding the apartment. But in addition to that, the lights seem dimmer. Everything just seems stranger, and the building is trembling a little bit because it's not exactly built to code. So there's just a lot going on for M in this way. And in my notes, I wrote, relatably, none of this makes any sense to M. Like, all of this is a very confusing state. If you've ever been 10 years old in an environment that you've never been before, which I have gotten lost many times in my youth. It's a very confusing, scary, and kind of worrying kind of situation where you're like, am I ever going to find where I live? And to compound matters, she eventually finds out that she's dead. Another very unfamiliar situation, and she's wondering, well, what am I still doing here? Am I a ghost or something like that? And so the only thing that she can really do to get out of this situation is retrace her steps, which you see at the end of the story. It notes that she's making her way back to the freight elevator, as that might be able to provide some sort of answer for her. but we don't really see if she ever finds out those answers. So we're only left with the confusion. And I just want to note that this does remind me a little bit of The Ocean at the End of the Way by Neil Gaiman. Another story with childlike confusion and childlike fear, although that story does end on maybe a bit of a happier note. It's still pretty sad, like this story, but Neil Gaiman doesn't outright say that the main character died accidentally, and now people are holding their funeral and this person has become a ghost. So very similar ways of telling the story through childlike confusion, but different outcomes. Another important aspect of the story is that of the twist ending. Joyce Carol Oates makes use of that, and surprise, M has actually died in this story. She fell down the elevator, which I will say Joyce Carol Oates does kind of cheat in this story, because there's no indicator that has ever actually happened. We see that M sees the regular elevator out of order. Apparently the doors just opened up for her, or she forced the doors open and fell down them. And so, but after that, she moves on to the freight elevator. And so there's no indication that has really actually happened, that she's actually died. There's a little bit of cheating going on. We find out that the child has died, which is very sad and very emotional, because you wanted things to work out for this interesting little child. But there is a bit of foreshadowing that I would say takes place. Not in the way that you think foreshadowing would be, because I said there was a little bit of cheating there. But at the beginning of the story, the narrator introduces M by saying, "This is M. This is a child who gets into dangerous situations and for who disaster was certain to happen." And indeed, that is what happens in the story. Joyce Carol Oates is really setting up that something bad is going to happen to M by the end of this story. And I thought it was going to be something more horrific than this, but it's still something pretty unfortunate. And then you see the conversation that happens between the plump girl and M in the elevator, where the plump girl is talking about death and how her mother might not come out of surgery, saying very negative things, which M does not react well to. And I think that's a little bit of foreshadowing, because when the plump girl mentions death, something that happened to M, in the recent past, like she reacts very negatively to that. She doesn't want to be reminded or told that she's dead in any way, because she's just a ghost sort of wandering over the last few moments of her life, apparently. So I do think there is some degree of foreshadowing in this story. It's unfortunately a very sad twist ending, but I do think Joyce Carol Oates does enough work to make the setup have an effective payoff, and for it to feel, a good earned twist ending given the atmosphere that she's created. I will note that the wake for M does seem really cruel. Like, imagine coming home and seeing people are holding a funeral for you, but they're all saying extremely negative things, like how you were willing to try new things, but you were never talented at any of them, that you were bound to get in a bunch of accidents, and that you weren't the smartest child. Like you were only 10 and you hadn't developed into a 12-year-old or gone through puberty yet, which does feel a bit feminist, that Joyce Carol Oates has put it in there. Like, M's value only comes when she develops into puberty rather than as a 10-year-old child. Although that does make a little bit of sense, because, children are worthless and should be scorned and shunned away from society. But that wake is very cool, and it makes me feel, even sadder for M in this story. And I do think the ending is very significant, because, as I mentioned before, like, she's retracing her steps. M seems to, take a slice of pizza. Very strange, because she's begun to feel cold, kind of that awareness of her death. And then she makes her way back to the freight elevator. Perhaps she thinks that in retracing those steps, she can avoid this fate, or it might be some sick dream, and she might be able to go back and avert this ending for her. We don't see if that ever happens, but the ending does feel really, really solid in that regard. Like, the kind of fear that you feel when you've learned something that you did not want to learn and you're trying to escape it. I think it's probably one of the better endings that I've read for a short story on this channel. The last thing I want to note is that it does kind of seem like Oates tells you how to feel in this story. Like she just spells out a lot of things for you in these short stories. It doesn't happen so much in this particular one, which is why I wanted to talk about this one. But in the other short stories in this collection, which are still pretty good, she does kind of spell things out and be like, you should feel this way or that way. It's not, yeah, it's just a minor problem in short stories that are otherwise pretty high quality. So not a big problem, but something worth noting. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Crack by Joyce Carol Oates. A really solid short story, really good. It does make me want to read more Joyce Carol Oates, so I will probably check out one of the many other short story collections that my library has from Joyce Carol Oates. So be on the lookout for that in the future, and I might even read one of her books down the road, as I've been seemingly avoiding them for one reason or another. But I do feel it's time to get to her work and see more about what she's saying and the ideas that she is working with. I 100% recommend that you check out this collection. There are a number of great short stories, but I especially recommend that you go out and read The Crack, as the way that she tells the story and that twist ending is particularly powerful. Of course, I did spoil the twist ending for you, so maybe my recommendation should be to read the other short stories in this collection, or just read anything else by Joyce Carol Oates. It should be quite fun. If you have anything to say about my review here, or you just want to make a comment on what I've said, do so in the comments below. Let's have a discussion. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, or join the Discord if you want to have more conversations or find out about the other things that I've been saying about similar authors. And in the meantime, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and wake-like travels. Farewell.